So this week we have unit number 2, and just like unit number 1, all activities are due by midnight tonight. For unit number 2, there are 2 chapters. Each chapter has a quiz and an assignment. You could be doing the chapters on a weekly basis, or you have 2 weeks time frame to do both of them, just like we did it during the first unit. Okay? So that's basically the same thing that we'll be doing. So we will be working on chapter number 3 today. And then, as you guys know, today will be our first round of presentations. So the Excel sheet states that Aiden, Nathan, and Ismail, these people will be going and will be doing that towards the end of the class. Okay. And you will be turning in your presentation inside the presentation one link. So you click on it, you will upload your files by browsing your, just like you do the regular assignment submission is exactly how you will do it. Okay, so going back to units and opening the book and going to chapter number 3. So we are still in phase number 1 of your book, just transitioning to a new chapter. Phase number 1, chapter number 3, Managing Systems Project. So in this chapter, you will learn a little bit about project management alongside with some of the roles of a systems analyst. So it's a blend of the two things. So you will see some of the things that are very much related to the job of a project manager. And then I will ask you guys to go over a few things as activities also. So as you can look at the objectives of this chapter, you can see that project actually works on a triangle. There are 3 sides of a project. You have cost as one of the important factor. You have time, right? And quality. Those are the 3 parts of that triangle: time, cost, and quality. You got to deliver what you have promised within the time frame that you have promised, within the money that you have decided that this can be done in. So all these 3 things have to go side by side. And if any variable changes, it will affect the whole project. Then you will be looking at explaining project planning, scheduling, monitoring, and reporting process. One of the most important component of today's class will be WBS, work breakdown structure. Again, also be looking at project tasks, and then looking at PERT, CPM, critical path. All of these components are very tied and linked with each other, very tightly integrated with the project management. We will then be looking at, towards the end, the project status report. We'll be looking at how project management softwares are used and what is risk management and why sometimes projects fail. Okay, now diving into the very first thing, which is project management. The whole idea of project management is that it revolves around the idea of planning the project, scheduling the project, monitoring the project, controlling the project, and reporting on the information system development. So project management revolves around all of these ideas. So it's planning, scheduling, monitoring, and controlling, and reporting on what has been done. Sometimes the projects go large scale, so more planning is needed. Small scale, less planning is needed. A project manager's job is to break the project down into smaller, individual, more manageable tasks and overlook these tasks over the course of the project. Now, these tasks, depending on what approach you are taking, will be dealt differently. Like if you're taking waterfall approach, or if you're taking systems analysis and design approach, or you're taking agile approach, or you're taking prototyping approach, whatever approach you take, that will be the defining factor. A successful project must be completed on time, within budget, and must deliver a quality product. And the quality of the product is actually tested against whatever yardstick you set at the beginning of the project. So systems developers can initiate a formal project as early as preliminary investigation, what we learned in the previous chapter. And systems development projects tends to be dynamic and challenging because sometimes requirements can change. So now looking at the project triangle that we have been talking about since the beginning of this chapter, it needs to be fast, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be good. When it comes to project management, things are not quite simple because this triangle is affected by several different factors. For example, you promise that you'll be able to deliver this project in 3 minutes because you know your team. What will happen if your team dynamics change? Somebody is needed in another project, so you move that person in another project. You brought somebody in place of that person as a replacement. Person goes on vacation. Person leaves the project. Person leaves the company. I mean, there are so many variables when it comes to people. Underlying technology that you were working on, some kind of dynamics change. Now there is a new regulation in place from government that you have to follow. Something else took more precedence in your existing project. Company fell short on money, cannot afford the project anymore. I mean, so many different variables can affect the project. So if an extremely time-critical project starts to slip, the project manager might have to trim some features down and figure out what can he or she do to still make this project a somewhat success. Microsoft offers a very interesting suggestion for project managers who have a project at risk. Find the stuck side of the triangle. Where are you having problems? And try to resolve those issues. So what in the world does a project manager do, which is sometimes called project leader, project manager, IT manager? There are different titles the person has. So a project manager usually is a senior systems analyst or an IT department manager. An analyst or a programmer analyst might manage smaller projects. In addition to the project manager, most large projects have a project coordinator who handles administrative responsibilities. So project managers are involved in planning, scheduling, monitoring, and reporting on the project. So when we talk about planning, in the earlier phases, they have to look at all the available resources, all the available things that they have to utilize, be able to understand the project, be able to figure out, okay, how can we resolve this problem? A lot of factors, that goes in planning. And then accordingly, considering the resources are shared, for example, they have to schedule these resources. And then you have to monitor these resources on daily basis and then report on the progress to the upper management or whoever they need to report. So the following section will now talk about three very important concepts. One is called the work breakdown structure, WBS. The other one is identify task patterns. And the third one is to calculate the project's critical path. So work breakdown structure pretty much involves breaking a project down into a series of smaller tasks. Before creating a work breakdown structure, the two primary charts needs to be understood. One is called a Gantt chart, and other one is called the PERT/CPM charts. There was a gentleman by the name of Henry Gantt, a mechanical engineer who developed Gantt charts almost 100 years ago. Gantt chart is basically a horizontal representation of bars, where the bar shows you that where one process starts and where it ends, and what other overlapping processes are running at the same time. So, and the yellow bar within the blue bar show you what progress have you made on this task. So when the yellow bar completes all the way through, that means you are done with the task 100%. So a Gantt chart also can simplify a complex project by combining several activities into what would be called task group. A Gantt chart can show task status by adding a contrasting color to the horizontal bars, as you can see in figure 3-3. Gantt charts can present an overview of the project status, but do not provide enough information, so other charting mechanisms were developed. And there were two of them. One is called PERT, the other one is called CPM. PERT, which is Program Evaluation Review Technique, was developed by the US Navy, and the Critical Path Method, CPM, was developed by a private industry. Their idea was very similar. So over the period of time, they merged into one idea. So we call it PERT/CPM. Some people prefer to call it just PERT. Some people prefer to call it just CPM. PERT is a bottom-up technique because it analyzes large complex projects as a series of individual tasks. And just as a pyramid is built from the bottom up using individual blocks, that's exactly how the PERT thinks. Look at this network diagram to understand PERT. What you see at the top is Gantt, the blue bars in figure 3-4. And what you see in the middle, that's what the PERT does. It creates a network diagram where it numbers this item that will be running. So let's say item number 1 is a parent to items 2 and 5. 2 and 5 will run in parallel. 3 and 4 are successors of 2, and 5 will continue to run while 3 and 4 and 2 are all running, and then 6 cannot start until it gets its feedback from 3, 4, and 5. On top of that, PERT allows you in your network diagram to create these cards that each one of these steps is actually a card. You can simply go in the details of that one and see, okay, what is the name of the task? When this task starts, when this task ends, what's the duration of this task, and so on and so forth. So that's what the PERT chart does with the help of a network diagram. Although Gantt chart offers a valuable snapshot view of the project, PERT actually goes in a little bit more detail, so helps you monitor and schedule and control the actual work a little bit better. So with a PERT chart, a project manager can convert task start and finish times to actual dates by laying out the entire project on calendar. So that's another feature in a lot of the project management software, that it gives you a calendar feature and also allows you to merge that calendar with whatever email client calendar that you are using. So the top screen in Gantt chart that you saw with 6 tasks, the PERT chart below shows the same project, but using separate boxes so that you can see the real progression of how things are going. Now moving to work breakdown structure, WBS. The idea of a WBS is to look at the bigger picture and divided it up into smaller, more manageable tasks or activities. So that's what it needs to be done. So for example, tasks include, for example, conducting interviews, designing a report, selecting a software, waiting for the delivery of the equipment, anything and everything that you consider as a single unit of work and is completed by itself is considered as a task. In addition to tasks, every project has events or milestones that whatever needs to be accomplished by a certain date. For example, when you start working on your RPG, advanced RPG project with Alan Pearson, you will be given your project task, and that project task then need to be divided into smaller, more manageable tasks. And that's exactly where you will use your work breakdown structure. You will look at your bigger task and you'll say, okay, in order for me to accomplish this big task, let's create the timeline. And in this timeline, we will first do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. You're going to go through the progression. So you can probably take help from the project management software as well to better align yourself and keep control of your whole project. So here at the bottom in figure 3-5, it shows the tasks and events that might be involved in the creation, distribution, and tabulation of questionnaire. So for example, you start work on the questionnaire. That's task number 1. And then you start preparing a questionnaire. So your questionnaire needs to get approved. After that, you need to start distributing your questionnaire. So all questionnaires gets distributed. Then you need all questionnaires to be returned back to you. And then you need to tabulate questionnaire responses and then present it in the form of a report. Let me give you an example. Last year, I don't know if you guys remember or not, I was part of a Gateway to Leadership program that started in September of 2022, and I graduated from that program in May of 2023. During the course of that program, we had to work on projects, and our project, one of the component of our project was to collect data. And one of the approved ways of collecting data by the project specification was through survey. So that's exactly the process we took. And that's exactly where this thing came in handy, where we took through this. So we had to meet with people, the stakeholders involved in the whole process. We have to have an entire timeline set. And then we had to have people to prepare the questions and then approve the questions and then come up with a timeline where these questions will be sent out. And then we had a timeline where we will receive the question, and then we have a timeline where we will tabulate the answers, and then we had a presentation in May for which we had to make sure that it was in the form of a report that we presented to Gateway's Workforce Development Solutions, Workforce and Business Solutions, WBS department. So anyway, so that's exactly the same process that we followed there as well. So it comes to listing your tasks. It's very important because you need to know what tasks needs to be completed for the other tasks to start after that. So that's one thing that's extremely important. For example, here is a very simple example that we start listing down our tasks. We need to reserve the room for the meeting. We need to order the marketing materials. We need to brief the managers. We need to send our client emails, and so on and so forth. So this is initial description of our tasks. That's step number one. You write them down, and you can do it in Microsoft Word. You can do it in Google Doc, wherever you want to do it. Then comes the process of estimating the task duration. How many days will each task take? When you're calculating the duration, you have to remember you got to calculate it in person day. And what is a person day? Person day is an 8-hour business day. So there are only 5 person day per week. So when we say the project is 2 weeks long, or this task is 2 weeks long, we're talking about 10 business days. That's what 2 weeks are. And in each business day, we are talking about 8 hours. So the total duration will be 80 hours. That's exactly how I'm getting calculate my task duration. And then as a project manager, we have to look at 3 different scenarios. One is the best case estimate, one is the worst case estimate, and one is the probable case estimate. So the manager then assigns a weight to each one of them. So for example, the best scenario is given the weight of 1. The worst scenario is also given the weight of 1. And the probable scenario is given the weight 4. Now, let's say the project manager says, okay, in the best case scenario, the project will be done in 20 days. In the worst case scenario, it will be done in 34 days. And in the most likely scenario, it will be done in 24. So now we plug in these values in the formula. And we can make an estimate that the project should be done in 25 person days. So when we say 25 person days, how many weeks are we talking about?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. 5 days per week will be 20 then. It's 25 days. 25 business days. Right? 5 times 4 will be 20. So how many weeks?
5.
5 weeks, right? Exactly. Exactly. So you always have to remember whenever we come up with the days, we are talking about the person days, business days, not the weekdays, or not the actual days on the calendar. Okay, so now what we will do is, did anybody else arrived here while I was talking, or is the same set of people that we have before?
I arrived, Mr. Saad.
Okay, you arrived. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, let me update the attendance sheet. So we're still missing Devin. Amruta is here. Okay. So what I would like you guys to do is I will put you guys in a breakout room for you to now discuss the Case in Point 3.1 Sunrise software. So that's on page number 79. Case in Point 3.1. In the meanwhile, you guys get to that page number. Let me organize your breakout rooms. Okay, here you go. So we'll start out with room number 1, which is Arali, Greg, Skripsky, Jack, and Zach.
We all basically agreed that there's no way you could add more people and have it be just as productive because there's not enough organization and you can't break down a job into that many people. And we said that about 2 to 4 people, it's probably a good number for a specific job because there's enough to collaborate as well as break down the job evenly.
Okay. How about room 2, Amruta, Ismail, and Miguel?
Yeah, we came to the conclusion that more people would be harder to manage. Depending on how well the manager is, they could take on maybe 10 to 20 people. It'd be a more manageable team to work with and collaborate.
Okay. And room 3, Alvin, Jonathan, and Nathan?
We agree with the system analyst. You can't really add more manpower without having, issues. Adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. Brooks Law. So, yeah.
And also we have to keep in mind the people that you're adding may not be up to speed with the rest of the group, so you may have to spend time training them and bringing them up to speed, which itself will take away time from the project. So moving on to room 4, Aiden, Ethan, and Victor.
We basically said the same thing as everyone else. We just came to the conclusion that if you have too big of a team size, it becomes too hard to organize. And Ethan made a good point, basically what you just said, that if you, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said.
I mean, if you bring new people on the
Yeah. He said like if you have a super big team, like of 100 people or 50 people, and like you have just a simple change that needs to get instituted, it has to be like run across the entire board and bring everyone, and keeping everyone up to speed is also a big issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And people who have knowledge about the project, of course, they can be of great help. People who have worked on similar projects in the past, certainly they can be of great help. So yeah, those are some of the factors to also keep in mind. Now moving on to the next page here, where it talks about the factors that affect the duration. When developing duration estimates, project managers consider 4 factors. One of them is the project size, another one is the human resources, another one is the experience with similar projects. If you have worked with something similar in the past, it really truly helps everybody get up to speed, and constraints. As far as the project size is concerned, of course, when the project comes in, when you go through the preliminary investigation, you do your fact finding, you get an idea of how big of a project it is. Likewise, you have to come up with the schedule. Likewise, you have to align resources. And sometimes you don't have the manpower to pull the project. So that's where the human resources could come in. They could go out and seek the power to run the project. In those cases, you will see some of the corporations advertise 6-month jobs, 3-month jobs, and they're looking for very specific skill sets. That's exactly are the kind of people that will be feeder into these kind of projects. And sometimes you will see on the job description that it's preferred that the person has experience with so-and-so tools or has experience with so-and-so kind of a work. We're looking for a programmer with hospital background. So they are basically working on a project for a hospital system. So bringing in person who has background of working on hospital systems would certainly bring them up to speed. And with minimal training, or this person could actually act as a person that will be able to help the rest of the team get familiarized with these kind of systems. And then comes experience with similar projects, followed by constraints, a restriction or requirement that the system must satisfy. For example, if the system constraint is such that you need to be able to run 1 million records every X amount of minutes, those kind of things, I mean, and how much resources you have to do that. I mean, like, that's negotiable. You can always go back and say, if we go for the sun and the moon, this is how much it will cost you, and this is exactly what your budget is. So all of these things can be then dealt with accordingly. Okay, moving on to displaying the work breakdown structure. So this is what we created this table, that we saw this table, that the tasks were listed, the description was written. Now we are writing the person days next to each duration. So for example, reserving the room is a 1-day task. Ordering the marketing material will take 9. Briefing the manager will take 2 days, and so and so forth. We come up with the duration for each one of them. Now comes the next question. Okay, will all of these tasks run in linear fashion, or is it possible that I may be running multiple tasks at the same time? Or do we have to have certain tasks completed before we run the next set of tasks? In order to make this all happen, we need to come up with our predecessor and successor list. So we need to learn about what we call task patterns, which is also a graphical representation. Typically, tasks are drafted in a box form like this, where you write the name of the task at the top, you write the start date and the end date of the task that tells you the duration of the task, and you can ID the task. So a task name should be a brief, descriptive, but it does not have to be unique in the project. So it needs to have a task ID, the task duration, the start date, the end date, and the whole 9 yards about that. Now, we need to figure out what tasks are dependent on this task, and this task is dependent on which other task. So author is giving you an example of a relay race in that regard. So here's an example of a task dependent on only one task. So preparing outline, which is a 5-day job, must be completed before we start working on creating the documents. Wood itself is a 9-day job. Okay. Now, similarly, there are tasks which have multiple successors. So we develop a plan, which is a 30-day task, which in turn will start 2 unique, distinct processes in parallel. One will be to design survey, the other one will be to arrange for interviews. Both of these tasks can run independent of each other and can have their own duration. Sometimes multiple predecessors come to start a task. So obtaining an authorization and creating a job description, both of these tasks are required to start conducting the interview. So all of these things need to be figured out. So working with complex tasks, well, you need to figure out the predecessor and successors, sometimes multiple predecessors, sometimes multiple successors, sometimes one predecessor, one successor. Okay, moving on to our next case in point over here. So we'll put you guys back in the breakout rooms for the next item in line here, and I will recreate these groups, and we're going to open the rooms for you guys. I believe 4 more people still need to join back. Should be here in like 5 seconds. Okay, now let's start one room at a time. Room number 1, Devin, Ethan, Ismail, and Victor.
I agree that breaking the tasks down into too small of a task will just create more work than you're accomplishing. But I think there is a happy medium to be met in the middle of monitoring the work being done, and also completing the work that's being monitored.
Okay, okay. And room 2, Aiden, Alvin, Aurelian, Miguel.
Yeah, we all discussed it and kind of we had a good agreement that, excuse me, but it all depends on the size of the project and the team, because with more of a detailed look, you're going to get better clarity, accountability, an estimate, what risks are involved. But then you kind of get over management and more time consuming, to where if it's a broad task, we got more flexibility. We don't spend as much time on planning, but then we need to be able to estimate the challenges that are going to be upon us. Sometimes those surprise challenges really throw us for a loop. So it makes it a bit more difficult.
Okay. Room 3, Amruta, Greg, and Zach.
So yeah, we kind of came to the agreement that it needs to be a balance between how detailed you are and what is unnecessarily detailed.
Okay.
So like instead of being checking for availability of the room and the people, that can just be one block and then set up the time schedule.
Hmm. Okay. And Jack, Jonathan, and Nathan.
Not like full agreement or anything. My idea was more siding with the project manager here, and that getting a detailed, as detailed as you can would probably be better for estimating what you need and the time required.
Okay. And what was the other team members?
I kind of was siding with the guy with who wanted a more broader one, because like what was said before, like how much time are you spending on the individual detail that we're focusing on, I guess.
Okay. Um, Anybody else? Any of the other rooms would like to add any more things that you might have forgotten to discuss before?
I mean, I guess it actually depends on the people, because some people having that more like broken down helps them get everything done a lot easier, but some people that all it needs is that generalized task.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next topic here, which is about the critical path. Critical path is basically you set all your successors and predecessors in line and you build your whole network, and then you figure out what is the longest path in your project, and that becomes your critical path. For example, if you look at this diagram, you will see that the task number 1 starts out and runs for 10 days. Task number 2 starts out and runs for 30 days. That's a linear, no problem. Now comes the 2 tasks that are dependent on hire analyst. The first task is plan training. The second task is arrange logistics. Both of them are running in parallel. But we notice that arrange logistics runs for 25 days, where plan training is only a 5-day task. And both of these tasks must be completed for announced training to happen. So the critical path will be the longest path, which will be obtain authorization, hire analysts, arrange logistics, and announce training. Because we know arrange logistics will be running for 25 days and plan training will only be running for 5 days. So plan training actually has 20 slack days before it needs to be completed, before announced training can start. So the total duration of the project, according to the critical path, will be 10 plus 30, 40, plus 25, 65, plus 30, 95 days. That will be considered as the critical path of the project. So tasks number 1, 2, 4, and 5 together, that will be regarded as this. Okay, so project monitoring and control comes next. Regardless of whether the project was planned and scheduled with project management software or in some other manner, the project manager must keep track of the tasks and the progress of the team members. And that leads us into monitoring and control techniques. To help ensure the quality standards are met, many project managers institute structured walkthroughs, which is a review of a project team member's work by other members of the team. And this keeps everybody in check. So there could be design reviews, code reviews, testing reviews. So there has to be some kind of schedule in place where everybody must be aware of that schedule, that on this we will be checking you against whatever principles you are checking them against. So a project that is planned and scheduled with PERT or CPM or in a work breakdown structure with a Gantt chart can be tracked and controlled using some of these techniques. Okay, so moving on to tasks and the critical path. Project managers spend most of their time tracking the tasks along the critical path because delays in those tasks have the greatest potential to delay the entire project. That's why being able to monitor the critical path is extremely important. Now, what I would like you all to do is go to the Blackboard and go to the unit number 2. And I want you to, if you are already in unit number 2, please refresh the unit number 2. Okay, so once you are in unit number 2, I want you to scroll down to the folder that says Chapter 3 Items. Okay, open that up. You will find in that WBS examples. Open that article. Tell me how many examples are here. Eight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so we will create 4 rooms. Each room will do 2 examples. Read through these examples about work breakdown structure. Discuss it within your group members. So when you guys go in the breakout rooms, do you know that you can see your room number? Are you guys aware of that? That you know that? Yeah, okay. So the people who will be in room number 1 will be looking at the first 2. People in room number 2 will be looking at the next 2. Room number 3 will be looking at the next 2. And room number 4 will be looking at the last 2. So you will get 20 minutes to look at these work breakdown structures and be able to discuss that. You will notice that if any one of you is familiar with any of these fields, will be able to better understand that and be able to maybe better explain that to the rest of the team members. And that will be a good exercise to show you that when you have background knowledge about any of the projects, that really brings you up to speed faster than maybe other people who do not have that background knowledge, and you can contribute to the success of the team more effectively. So we'll set aside 20 minutes for this, and you guys understood what you got to do here? You get to do here? Okay, then
Yes.
we will open the room for 20 minutes. We still have 1, 2, 3 people, a couple people still to come back. Okay. Devin and Jonathan are the only 2 people left to be back. Probably will be here in another 10 seconds. In the meanwhile, let me share screen. And let's ask you guys room by room, how did it go? Okay. So, room number 1. Alvin, Ethan, Greg, and Victor. You guys got the first 2 work breakdown structures. The construction of a house and market research. Anybody has any background in any of this that you guys were going through?
Yeah, well, not a house or market research, but I was a project manager at Walgreens and IBM.
Aha.
So I got to see the way this works, and how we were discussing, like the shareholders have one idea and they give it to you, and then you have to bring your own team in to make all this wonderful little steps that you see in the construction of a house and marketing research. You got to make all that happen. And then, of course, once everything goes a little longer than expected, you're to blame. So get a finger pointed to that fun. But yeah, each one of these kind of explain out what details each little process. Nice little flow chart.
Yeah, I was on the low end of the totem pole for market type research, working at Culver's, like release a new type of burger, and you have to go ahead and collect information. So, like, I was part of the execution phase.
Okay. Okay, cool. Let's see. Room number 2, Arali, Jack, Nathan, and Zach. You guys had wastewater treatment and commercial construction project. Anybody has any background information in either of the 2 things that you guys went over, and how did it go?
I didn't have any background knowledge in either. I did mine on the commercial construction. It was fairly straightforward. It's just like one really long step-by-step process on how like construction actually works. And those step-by-step processes were then broken down into even further step-by-step processes. So it was easy to grasp.
Okay. Room number 3, Aiden, Devin, and Miguel. You guys had engineering project plan and infrastructure deployment. Same questions to your room 2?
We didn't really have any like background knowledge on it, but we talked about how it's a nice way to plan out everything step by step. But we did see a difference between the 2. Whereas in the engineering project plan, it definitely is like step by step. You go to 1, then you go to 2, then you go to 3, because the first step in 2 is to review all of 1, and the first step of 3 is to review all of 2 and 1. While in the infrastructure deployment, the first step is the scope of the project, and a part of that is defining preliminary resources like budget, but developing budget is the 4th step down the line. So it definitely seems like it's going back and forth, or multiple things are happening at once.
Okay. Okay. Amruta, Ismail, and Jonathan. How about you guys? The last 2, moving in office and planning a trade show.
Mine, it wasn't quite moving office, but we had a temporary office move. So a lot of the steps that were in that diagram I had to do myself when I moved to a temporary office, like the planning, moving the equipment. We had to move our phones and also our like radio systems. So all that is kind of goes along with what's in the diagram for moving office.
Cool. Awesome. So with that, let's move on to the next topic in the book, which is about reporting. So reporting is 3.6, and that's page number 88. Okay, so project status meetings. That's another aspect of your project development, that you will have these meetings. These meetings could happen daily, weekly, depending on the nature of the project, but there has to be some project status meetings in place. Next comes another very important component where the project manager has to start preparing the reports. And then also at the same time, the project manager has to start dealing with the problems. Some of these problems could get serious, like, for example, team members not getting along or people moving away from the project to other projects. Different kinds of serious situations can occur. A project manager's best course of action lies between two extremes, which are there is a project manager that reports on every little thing that happens, and then there is a project manager who doesn't report on anything. So you got to find a good medium in between the two extremes. Project management softwares can be used for this purpose. So to generate your PERT, CPM, Gantt charts kind of stuff. And there are a lot of softwares out there in the market. Some are open source, some are licensed software. So what I did over here under this week, there is Gantt chart in Microsoft Project. Okay, so this is a short, probably video, short video for you to watch about what goes in the Microsoft project. So what I would like everybody individually to watch this video. This is the third link in the chapter 3 items. And when you're done watching this video, give me a green check. Okay, so we are now moving to page number 92, which talks about that we have work breakdown structure as one component. We guys already looked at that. You guys looked at Gantt chart. You guys looked at network diagram. And now that you guys looked at how Microsoft Project does things, you can definitely walk into that and learn more about how Microsoft Project works. And what are some of the things that you can do on it with it. And there are other products out there in the market that you can also utilize and work. Next topic comes risk management. Risk management pretty much is an alarm that tells the project manager what things could happen, what things could go wrong. As a result, a project manager needs to have a risk management plan in place, which includes a review of the project scope, stakeholders, budget, schedule, and any other internal or external factors that might affect the project. You need to identify the risk. You need to figure out what will be the impact of this risk on the project. And in order to do that, you can set up a chart like this. There is a low impact, low probability risk. Will happen not very frequently. And if it does happen, will not impact the project that much. You can have high impact, low probability, means will have a great impact on the project, but may not happen very often. Or you can have low impact, high probability, could occur a lot, but whenever it occurs, will have a very minimum impact on the project, or high impact, high probability, or medium impact, medium probability. These are different kinds of impacts it can have on the project. So the purpose of the quantitative risk analysis is to understand the actual impact in terms of dollars, time, project scope, or quality. Moving on to managing for success. Project management is a challenging task. Project managers must be alert, technically competent, and highly resourceful. Unfortunately, projects can be derailed for several reasons, and one of the most important, or three of the most important reasons are cost, quality, and time, which are influenced by the factors coming from the outside. Okay, how about at this time, I will put you guys in another breakout room for just-in-time software for probably 10 minutes. And let's do that real quick. And let me start the breakout rooms here. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so we're going to do this. We're going to do this for 10 minutes, and you guys will be back here. Okay, so room number one, and this time every room had more people than before. So room one had Alvin, Ismail, Jonathan, Miguel, Victor. What's your guys' take on this?
Well, you want to, you got to talk to the boss, got to keep a positive attitude because you don't want to be that negative Nelly. Just kind of mention that more people could make it worse because it'll even push it out later than what you already had planned. Try coming up with different solutions, like changing priorities, giving more time or doing less work. You find a solution without compromising quality. So just discuss that with them and see what how you can proceed with that, and kind of point out not just pointing out the issues, but you're also showing him solutions to those issues.
Okay, okay. Room number two, Aiden, Amruta, Greg, Jack, and Zach. Room two, Aiden, Amruta, Greg, Jack, Zach.
We basically said how you have to kind of introduce what Brooks Law is to him, how you have to let new employees that would be joining the project know how the project's going to work, and it's going to cost more time, as well as what Greg said about introducing or having the people that are already on the project having to explain it to them. So now you have less people actually working on it.
Okay. And room three, Arali, Devin, Ethan, and Nathan.
Our point was like, first off, probably our first point was explaining Brooks Law to the project manager so that, this is just us coming up with this. This is something that's known and talked about, and like we can show that this is tried and tested. And the second point being that, already behind schedule at the moment, running to get more programmers and catching them up is going to probably just keep that behind schedule.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so with that, here we are wrapping up the section 9.3.9, the last section, a second last section, and then a small section of summary after that. And then we'll take a break. So the major objective of every system is to provide a solution to a business problem or opportunity. So if the system does not do this, then it is a failure. So the whole idea is to keep everything intact. Anything that is unclear, clear it. Anything that is unidentified, identified. Anything that is inadequate, adequated. Anything that is imprecise, precise it, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea is to make sure everything runs smoothly. If there are budget issues, then, unrealistic estimates could be one of the reasons that you may run into a budget issues if there are no other unforeseeable reasons that would come forward, or failure to develop an accurate forecast, or poor monitoring of the progress, or scheduling delays, or human resources issues. They could all contribute to that factor. Finally, and when it comes to schedule issues, problems with timetables and project milestones can indicate a failure to recognize task dependencies, confusion between effort and progress, poor monitoring and control methods, personality conflicts among team members, or turnover of project personnel, could be some of the other issues. Besides that, if the project manager fails to plan, staff, organize, supervise, communicate, motivate, evaluate, direct, and control properly, then the project is certain to fail. So as you start noticing, some of the very important components of project manager's job is supposed to plan, is supposed to staff, is supposed to organize, supervise, communicates. It has to be very good communication skills have to be extremely great. On top of that, when the team gets demotivated, or if a team member gets demotivated, project manager's job is also to motivate the team, evaluate the team so that everybody can overcome whatever obstacles that they have or shortcomings that they have, and be able to direct and control properly. And then you should be able to have a very successful team, even when factors outside the control of the project manager comes in. Sometimes they're able to somehow manage. Sometimes it's a failure when you can't really control every outcome. So we will stop here. We'll take a break here. When you guys come back from the break, then we will move on to our one last piece before we move over to your presentations. That will be done in the last 1 hour of today's class. Anyway, so I will see you guys back at 8 o'clock. Okay? So I'll see you at 8. Okay, guys, welcome back. So as I told you guys before we went on break, that there are a couple of things that I want to talk about before starting the presentations. So one of those two things I would like to share first, and that will be back to the chapter 3 items under the unit 2. The chapter 3 items under the unit 2, I made you guys look into the WBS, and I made you guys look into the Gantt chart in Microsoft Project. But there are 3 more resources that I want you to look into during the week. One is Gantt chart examples resource. This has up to 5 different Gantt chart examples, and go over them, and that will help you see a little bit more in terms of Gantt chart. Then there is network diagram examples that will help you see into the network diagrams. I think towards the bottom of this article, there are network diagrams. And then there is an example that includes WBS, network chart, Gantt chart, and schedule, all in one place. So that's another article that I want you to look at. It's a very short article that shows you all of these variants. Okay, so having said that, we will now transition to our one more thing, which is about your assignments and quizzes. I think I already told you guys at the beginning that chapter 3 quiz and chapter 3 assignments are available to you right now. But again, you guys have 2 weeks to deliver this. And any of the unit 1 items that I've assigned to you 2 weeks ago or last week, they're all due by midnight tonight. Okay, so having said that, here you have your question of ethics. The question of ethics, which is located on page number 96. For this one, I put you guys in 2 big rooms, each having 7 people, and I will be putting you guys in this room for, let's say, 12 minutes. So you will discuss the question of ethics within your group, and larger group means more discussion. And then when you come back, you report on your discussions, and then we will transition to the presentation part. Okay? So your rooms are opening now. So I believe couple people are left to be back. They should be here any second now. So we'll start with room number 1, which has Aiden, Devin, Ethan, Ismail, Jack, Jonathan, and Miguel. So what did you guys talked about?
We pretty much discussed that if the project isn't done yet, it would be responsible to bring it up to the manager, because as the manager, they should be looking to help. So go to them, the earlier the better, to see if you could come up with a solution to the problems you're facing.
Okay, cool. Room number 2, Alvin, Amruta, Rally, Greg, Nathan, Victor, and Zach.
Same. Better to tackle a small issue before it becomes out of control than to let it go and then literally cost you your job as well as your department. So, you know, get the small fish.
Okay, cool. Okay, having said that, let's get to our presentations here. So in the presentations, let me bring up the Excel workbook again so that I know. Okay, so it's Aiden, Nathan, and Ismail. These are the 3 people going today. So did you guys submitted your presentation already in the Dropbox?
Yeah, I did. I submitted mine already.
Yeah, I did when we got into class.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, awesome. So everybody has it. Okay, awesome. So let me bring up that presentation. You guys can share, will share your screens, right? When you're presenting?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'd like to
cool.
share mine.
Awesome. Okay, so let me get where I want to get, and then I will let you guys know. And the first person to go will be Aiden. So just give me 1 minute, Aiden.
No problem.
Okay, Aiden, I am ready. You can go ahead and start. You can share your presentations. All
right. So I'm going to be discussing the history of the Soulsborne video game subgenre, and I'm going to be using the history as kind of like a way to explain how it became a subgenre at all. So Soulsborne is a subgenre of action role-playing games that was developed by From Software. The game design formula was initially created in Demon Souls, but that is definitely not a more popular game. That's more of a cult classic, and much more people are going to recognize Dark Souls, and that's where the formula is more credited to. And this formula would later go on to create other franchises such as Bloodborne, and that's where the term comes from, is because it's a mix of these 2 franchises with the same, pretty much the same exact game design. And it would go on to influence a bunch of other creators. There's a bunch of defining characteristics about these games. A big one is that they're notoriously challenging. They have to be really difficult, otherwise the community will rip it to shreds. Their level design is very intrinsic and complicated, and there's a lot of shortcuts and secrets and a lot of stuff for the player to really dig their teeth into. All of the levels throughout the game are all checkpoint based, so you go from one checkpoint to another until you get to the end boss, and the boss will be kind of a gateway into the next area. And the whole point of these games is really just to defeat all the bosses. There's a stamina-based combat, which means that all of your movement, any attacking, defending, any kind of movement is based on a stamina meter that depletes over time. All these games have the same point-based XP system. So you defeat enemies and you get points, it's basically the only currency in the entire game. And if you are ever defeated, you will lose all your points that you've gathered up, and they'll stay where you were defeated, and you can come pick them up again. To really describe how it starts with Dark Souls, really. Dark Souls 1 was really the beginning of all of it. It's set in an apocalyptic medieval European setting, and the only thing that's really told to the player is you're supposed to go defeat bosses throughout the world. There's not really much story that gets presented to the player. all the story pieces throughout all these games are hidden in item descriptions and context clues that are only inferred throughout the map. In Dark Souls 1, there is 13 bosses total and 24 explorable areas. And obviously, those numbers don't really match up. So you can imagine that a lot of these explorable areas feel very empty. And that's definitely the biggest gripe that the public had with this game. So it definitely has a too little problem, which for a company first starting out in the industry, it's not the worst issue to have. Dark Souls 2 tried to improve on this. It has 42 bosses and only 29 areas. So they overloaded the game with too much content, and it definitely lacked on some gameplay improvements. In fact, most of the complemented gameplay aspects of the first game, such as like enemy design and boss design and combat design, a lot of those kind of were seen as more janky and analog in Dark Souls 2. So it definitely has too much of an issue. Dark Souls 3 is where it really gets perfected. It has 25 bosses and only 23 areas, which makes the game feel much more full of content, which is what Dark Souls 1 struggled with, but it's not overwhelming enough that it's taking away from the general combat or gameplay aspects like Dark Souls 2. So it definitely is just right. They improved on the combat by including new weapon types and magic types and basically just introducing new ways for creativity for the player, which creates a much stronger sense of replayability that would then go on to become a more integral part of the formula that would be introduced into these new franchises. Bloodborne and Sekiro, these two games they're not connected to any other game that FromSoft has created. However, they're made by the same developers. They're unique in their own way. They're tweaked slightly, but they still maintain the initial formula. Bloodborne is set in a more Victorian London setting and has a much higher emphasis on faster paced combat, while Sekiro is set in a more feudal Japan area and has more emphasis on precise combat and swordplay. And around the time these two games were developed is when reviewers and the community started throwing around the term Soulsborne and really started to push it more as a subgenre instead of just a singular franchise. And this would go on to influence creators to start making their own games with this formula. These creators would add their own little twists to the games, but they had to maintain the original feel. Otherwise, they would just get trashed by the public, which is what happened to Lords of the Fallen. That game tried to stand out too much on its own and was also bogged down by buggy gameplay and a bunch of unbalanced issues and stuff. So a lot of people didn't really like that game, but Star Wars Fallen Order, that game's made by EA, which is a huge company. It's also got the Star Wars title on it, so it gets pushed into a much larger audience. And it was the first time that this genre was really even pushed into a large audience at all. And so it brought in a whole new player base's worth of feedback into the mix. And Lies of P is up here because it's just the most recent success in the subgenre. And that one stands out for its more customizable combat experience and its interesting world. It's set in the Pinocchio universe, and you play as Pinocchio. And that's about it.
Okay. Okay. So you can keep sharing.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I'm glad you were able to fit it within the time frame.
Yeah, I had to cut a lot out. I did a time test last night. Yo, I was yapping.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that because when you're excited about something that you want to talk about, there is a likelihood that you will go overboard. So you were here around 6 minute mark. So
Okay, cool.
that's kind of good.
Last
That's
night I
good.
was 9 minutes, so
That's good. So I really like that there was a flow in the presentation. You took help from visuals. If you go to
Mhm.
is this your very first slide?
This is my last slide.
Okay,
The
can
first
you
one.
go to your very first slide? Okay. Now, I would probably put a little bit more emphasis on the title and your
Yeah, I did have like a little subtitle with it as well, but I felt like it didn't necessarily fit in with the point I was making too much and I couldn't really figure out. I also felt like there was just too much on the screen as well, so I kind of just cut it out.
Yeah, that's fine, but probably a little bit more standout. Maybe
Yeah, for sure.
like a little, maybe like a background or
Hmm. Yeah.
opacity, or make it a little bit stand out. And similarly, if you go to your last slide, okay, never end your presentation on the last slide.
I gotcha.
There
Yeah,
should
I was
be a
definitely
slide
struggling to
after
figure
that.
out how to properly tie things together in an ending.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, I mean, like, you can always take these note pointers and go back for your second presentation
Yeah, for sure.
and bring those back. Yeah. So anyway, it was very good. I mean, like, there was confidence, there was flow. You know, I could feel the excitement in your voice. All of these very, very good and positive things. So yeah, I mean, anybody else has anything to say?
Good job, because talking about the Soulsborne games, you can spend days talking about
Yeah,
those.
man. Yeah, dude. I had a lot more content. I did a whole draft of the information I wanted to present beforehand before making the presentation, and I ended up cutting over half of it out.
I have a quick question for
Yeah, for
Saad.
sure. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yes. Yes.
So when you said don't end the presentation on the last slide, what do you mean by that?
Means I'll have one more slide after the last slide for question answer or
Okay.
summary or something. Otherwise, you know, I mean, if the presentation just abruptly ends like that, it just does. I mean, like, great presentation you would not end nicely.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's what it is.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. And just give me 1 minute here before I ask the next person to come forward. Okay, so Nathan, you can now do. I can take over and present.
Right then. All right. Tell me if that's all good. All right. So for my presentation, I decided to do a little overview of Western films, specifically what interests me, the history of it, and something of a dichotomy between the two rises of Western films, which we'll get into. So to begin, when I say Western films, it's specifically the Wild West films. So Western, as we'd see it, is something of a super genre. So if you think of romance or comedy or like war films, a Western would be up there. So it's a very broad that I'm just going to be talking about specifically in the Wild West. But to begin, we start with the 1880s, where we begin with Buffalo Bill's Wild West. So this is not a film, it's a circus performance essentially, where they go across and they do performances, they do plays, and they mythologize the Wild West. This is where we begin with putting in the Wild West into these big performances and films, and eventually is what directly causes films such as what I have up here, The Great Train Robbery, which is a silent film. This causes the boom of the silent films once those come around. This isn't very long lasting though. When sound comes to films, big studios just drop westerns and they lose relevance for the entirety of the Depression. But when they come back is the 1940s. In the 1940s, we get just a whole plethora of Western films. Specifically in 1939, we get a lot of John Wayne films, which is what begins his career with Stagecoach. This is where we see, the classic Wild West. This is where we see John Wayne. This is where we see like John Ford coming in as a director. And this is a what we'd call a more old school Wild West. But that goes on for the 1950s until the 60s, where the boom comes once again in the middle of the 60s, where we get also a lot of more Italian filmmakers, a lot of foreign, but specifically Italian filmmakers in spaghetti westerns. Sergio Leone is obviously who we all know for Dollars Trilogy, like Fistful of Dollars and The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And this is what starts what gets called a revisionist Wild West films. This is something that, compared to the past, is a lot more grittier, a lot darker. for something like The Unforgiven or Tombstone later on in the 90s, this is when we get a lot more realistic. So between these two eras, however, is kind of an interesting relation in that you have the 1940s and 50s with World War II, and then the aftermath of that. And then you also have the 1960s and 70s with their Vietnam War films and their cowboy films, where we get two eras. The first of which, with World War II being like knights and such. So the era of knights, where we have John Wayne, we have those classic films where they're much more lawmen. They're these well-kept heroes who are very tied to the place they're from, very tied to their place that they're protecting the people. Often when they side with the law, they side with a societal construct and are very tied to that. But within this, there's still American, uniquely American values who keep their individual idea of being a big hero, but still being themselves. But in the 1960s and 70s with the spaghetti westerns, we go on to their Ronin. I use this term Ronin, which is essentially a disgraced samurai from Japan, a mercenary. I use that as the name for this, as it's influenced by the Japanese with Seven Samurai and Yojimbo, which Fistful of Dollars actually is a remake of Yojimbo. And this comes with a big change in how we see those protagonists, how we see the stories. These protagonists are far more with a nebulous kind of justice. They enact what they think is right. They enact not really any societal change, but just their own change. There's a lot more selfish. So like the man with no name is just rugged. He just does what he wants. He's a very vengeful, rather than very trial and justice oriented with the knights. But still, above all else, they're still like Americans. There's still American individualism. There's still, all about underdog stories, especially with both of these. That's how those two still connect, being cowboys and still being these Wild West heroes, but being so different each other in eras. Nowadays, we don't really see that many Westerns anymore. Nowadays, it's not exactly a big genre, though it's still a super genre in that a lot of people take inspiration. So like Firefly and The Mandalorian I have up here are undoubtedly Westerns, but they aren't Wild West Westerns, as they aren't set in the genre. And a big inspiration also that these bring on are the heroes they bring. So we had the knights of old who are now lawmen or just law-oriented individuals, but we also have the roguish, mercenaries like the man with no name from Sergio's films. And this is a more American style from more American culture of heroes, is probably the biggest influence there. So that's it. Right now from the
Cool.
sunset.
Awesome. So, thank you for staying in time. Like you were probably in the last few seconds. That's good. And keep the presentation on the screen, please. Share the presentation again. Okay.
Sorry,
And
there we go.
let's go to the very first slide. Okay. I really like the color theme. It just blends very well with what you were bringing forth here. The pictures were very nicely placed. I really liked on slide number 2, you made effort to, put them in a very nice fashion. You were not putting all the pictures in the same place, which is another good thing in presentation. For example, in slide 3, if you go to slide 3, you have it on the right. If you go to slide 4, you have it on the left. And when you do that in a presentation, that doesn't put people to sleep, because when brains see an activity, then it basically comes back to life. So that's pretty neat. And then in slide number 5, You change the positions again with the text. And number 6, I really like that division that you did between the two eras. And, likewise, the transition was very nice. Towards the end, on the very last slide, even after that, number 10, okay, I would have preferred maybe a little bit of text here,
Okay.
having just a plain picture, but I'm glad you had an ending slide there, which is kind of nice. And always remember, even if you are going in a setup where people may know you, so when you are starting your presentation, you can say who you are and what your topic is all about, and then you can get going from there. There are many different ways of starting a presentation though, but just this is one of the many ways. Anyway, thank you very much. Does anybody else has any question here for Nathan? Okay, thank you, Nathan. Okay, just 1 minute before the next person is called. Okay. Okay, Smile. All yours.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I did mine on aggressive inline skating. I mainly chose this one because I used to actually do this back in the day. And I recently got back into it. So I want to kind of just inform people about it and kind of promote it to kind of make it, a little bit more popular. It's not a very much seen sport. Let's see how to go. Oh, there it is. Okay. So what is aggressive inline skating? So mainly it's a extreme sport. It's very similar to like BMX and skateboarding. Um, Biggest difference is that you're on skates. The skates are specifically designed to perform tricks, stunts, jumps off of like ramps, rails to do grinds. Um, and then also the sport is, I believe it's fun. It's a good way to get adrenaline and get that feeling of freedom, as well as satisfaction, because if you practice a trick over and over and then you accomplish it, then that's something that's rewarding. um, as far as the skates go, so this is the kind of the biggest difference, or the main point of it. So these are different from your traditional skates that you might see. Um, so the biggest difference on these would be the smaller wheels. A lot of like the speed skates have really big wheels, but these have smaller wheels. That way you can maneuver better and they don't get in your way. The skates also have grind plates on the sides of them, and you can use that to slide on the sides of rails, ledges, just pretty much whatever you could think of. It also has frames, so that would be on the bottom of the boot, and those can also be used for grinding and just kind of uh, being creative with what you do. Um, the boots themselves are also unique. Um, Pretty much you can kind of pick your style, pick your fit, whatever's more comfortable for you. And then another thing about the skates is that they're interchangeable, so you can uh, pick a boot, pick a frame, pick your wheels, pick different stuff, and kind of mesh them up and mix them up as kind of how you want based on your style or comfort. So this goes back into customization. So this diagram pretty much shows everything that you can replace or customize in the skate. So if one of the parts break, let's say your buckle breaks, you could, buy a new one, put it on. You can change pretty much, your wheels. You could change the type of frame. Different frames are used for different things. So you can have like a 4-wheel frame, and that one's going to be used mainly for speed. Then you can use like a 2-wheel, and then in the middle you have like a grind bar, so it's more intended for grinding. Um, the main thing people change on these is like the liners and the frames. Uh, People change the liners, like they buy different liners just because of comfort. Maybe your foot's wider, stuff like that. And then depending on what you're doing, you change the frame as well. So where do you skate? You could pretty much skate wherever. The obvious choices would be, the skate park. There's one here actually right next to the college. So there's different skate parks. There's indoor skate parks, outdoor skate parks. Um, the outdoor ones are usually bigger, um, and they're made out of concrete mainly. The indoor ones are kind of good during the winter, so you can be able to skate while the weather's bad, and those are usually made out of wood. And then there you can also obviously skate, out in like downtown, out in the street, and you can use like stuff there as well. You kind of make your environment your skate park. And as we all know, with great power comes with great responsibility. So, safety first. Want to make sure that we wear the proper equipment. I know I've fallen a couple times, and I know if I didn't have the proper stuff, then I would probably got more hurt than I was. Um, so at the end of the day, I think it's a good sport. I think it's fun. I think it's unique, very customizable way to show your personality. And yeah, I encourage everybody to look into it and maybe give it a try.
Smile, thank you very much. The the first thing I want to tell you is you were under time. So you did it like in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and you had to do at least 5 to 7 minute mark. So now this was a good presentation. You executed it nicely. The whole presentation was done nicely. Usually, in these kind of times when you realize that you are under time, you probably can bring a short story. So if you go back a slide, you brought in a story here that you talked about you falling, and if you didn't have the proper gears, you might have hurt yourself. You could probably have talked a little bit more about that story. That's how you fill in when you are thinking that, okay, you're under time or you don't have enough prepared. And also, if you like on the very first slide, you didn't had good grasp on how to move forward. So you're looking for the controllers, right? You can also use the arrow keys to move back and forth. So
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
my first time doing a presentation.
yeah, I understand, but that's another thing to keep in mind. If you are going to do something that you have never done before, do a little practice of that before walking in. And that will actually save you, because when you have a solid start, that you can just build confidence on top of that. So that's kind of neat. Now moving forward to the next slide, uh, even slide after that. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Next slide. Yep, this is the slide. I'm glad you spent time on it. You labeled everything. You were talking about different things in detail, and you were linking it back to some of the nitty-gritty details of this particular sport, which was pretty cool. Which was pretty cool that there is so much into one shoe people don't even realize and pay attention to. Now go to the next slide. Okay, and I'm glad you talked about the different venues where you can skate, and when the weather is bad, where can you go, and what is these surfaces are made of. So I really like you not only talked about the sports, but you also liked about where it can be done, and you also gave reference to our Gateways Racine campus That's where it is, right behind the whatchamacallit, is that the Racine building? No, Lake building. Yeah. And
Racine
oh,
building, yeah.
sorry, it's Michigan building. Sorry, Michigan building, right behind the Michigan building. Skate park. I don't know if you guys probably might have seen it when you have parked in the parking lot.
Yeah, I go there all the time.
Yeah.
And then if you go to the next slide. Okay, and then you talked about the safety measures, which was also another very important component of it, that you not only talked about the excitement of the sports and also talked about where it can be done, also talked about what is the importance of safety in this particular sport. And then go to the next slide, well, probably was your conclusive slide. And that's where you had a conclusion slide, which is extremely nice. You mentioned that it is an aggressive inline skating. If I would be you, I would not put that paragraph there. That's something I would want to hear from you. And you could have moved that conclusion right in the middle. And I would want you to be saying that, what you put out there. Because people want to hear it from you because it's your passion. You're excited about it. Okay? And also, to answer one of the questions that came from in the chat, I think Devin asked that question, like what text could have been placed on the very last slide. So Devin, this is a good example. It could be a thank you. It could be a conclusion. It could be Q&A, some kind of a bigger text to close out. So yeah, thank you. And does anybody else has anything to add to this? Wow, you guys are a quiet group, man. Thank you very much, though. Thank you, Smile. Okay, so Devin, does that answer your question? Okay, cool, awesome. So tapping into next week, 3 people are done. Let's see. And next week, and I believe this probably would have given you guys some idea in terms of what you can do and how you can present, right? So here we go. Okay, so next week, we have Jonathan, Arali, and Daniel. And then on standby, we have Miguel and Zachary. So these 5 people should be preparing your presentation.
So I just remembered what I was going to say. So if you have two separate screens, you'll get a presenter screen and the presentation screen. In the top left of that presenter screen, it should show you a timer. Then that'll help you you'll know if you need to add a little bit more of the fluff or you need to start cutting things down.
Of course. And also, if you have a smartphone, most of the smartphones have timers. You can start a timer there as well if you don't have 2 screens.
Yeah, I didn't realize what Greg said, but that's what I did. I just had my phone on there and just cut some topics quicker if I realized I went a little too over, like at a minute mark or something.
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good recommendation.
So yeah, that's kind of nice. And yeah, that would be all for tonight. And you guys know what you have to do during the week. And yep.
Have a good one.
Here.
Have a good weekend,
Have a
Saad.
good
Have a good night.
weekend.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good
See you
night,
next
guys.
Monday.
Good job on everybody.
Thank
that
you. Have a
presented.
good night.
Good night. Good
Have a
night.
good weekend.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good week.